guess we'll get started here. So just a quick thanks for everybody that's showing up at 6 o'clock on Saturday. I know everybody's probably ready to get to the bar and or have supper sometime soon, so I appreciate everybody coming in to see the talk. So we're going to be talking about attacking ADFS endpoints with PowerShell today. Kind of a high-level overview. If you're an external pen tester, this can be great for you, because from an external standpoint, ADFS is, I want to say it's a completely untapped resource, but we see a lot of organizations kind of ignoring it in terms of things like single sign-on and what ADFS can do. So hopefully this gives some of the external pen testers in the room good targets to go after, and internal people good targets to secure. So a little bit about me. My name's Karl Fosaaen. I'm a managing consultant over at NetSpy. Our company based out of Minneapolis. I'm personally out of the Portland office. I wear lots of hats. As a managing consultant, I kind of spend my time managing clients, managing a handful of consultants at NetSpy. So do a little bit of everything. During my consulting time, I'm primarily doing network and web app pen testing on the network side, internal and external, and red team. Do a little bit of password cracking. Eric Gruber's down here. He also helps with managing the password cracking boxes that we have. You may have seen some of the blog posts we've done about all of the missteps we've taken trying to create those password cracking boxes. So it's kind of fun stuff. I also do social engineering. I'm the person responsible for the methodologies for our on-site and phone-based social engineering. If anybody wants to swap war stories about on-site social engineering stuff, that's always fun. Additionally, you might find me on the NetSpy blog. I'm relatively active there. The stuff that we're going to cover today, almost all of it's going to be on the NetSpy blog already. A couple of posts that came out within the last couple of months. We're covering some of that stuff, and then a little bit more on top of that. Additionally, I got one more after this, I promise. DEF CON Swag Goon, if anybody in here is wearing a DEF CON t-shirt from the last 5 or 6 years, I probably sold it to you. So you can frequently find me at the DEF CON Swag area every year. And the very last one here, pinball repair. We have an old Twilight Zone machine at the NetSpy office that, if anybody's familiar with older pinball machines, they're kind of like an expensive sports car. You can use them for a couple hours and then something might break down and you have to fix it. That's kind of how it is with the Twilight Zone machine. Do a lot of pinball repair, which is actually a lot of fun. For those that weren't at Hacker Jeopardy last night, I think Scott's going to kill me for having this photo up. We were Hacker Jeopardy champions last night, so that was a lot of fun. So from an overall overview here, we're going to do just kind of a heads up as to what ADFS is, and then go through different walkthroughs for how you'd want to test things, how you want to set up an environment, how you can go about actually attacking this kind of stuff. We're going to detour into kind of Skype message phishing. The Federated Skype for Business stuff has some underlying ADFS stuff. It's not pure attacking ADFS, but I think it's really cool, and hopefully you do too. So we'll kind of detour into that, and then wrap things up with a couple other attacks, attack mitigations, and questions. Sound good? So, from an ADFS overview standpoint, ADFS is, I guess at its core, is really a way to expose Active Directory out to the internet or the extranet by opening up kind of a single sign-on type of interface, which doesn't use Kerberos. I think the exact definition was opening up to the extranet without exposing Kerberos to the internet. I'm sure Kerberos on the internet would be really cool and really interesting to mess around with, but it's not really built for that. So ADFS is really that internet-facing replacement for Kerberos for AD authentication. We're going to talk about a couple of different terms here that probably will come up throughout the course of this talk. IDP is an identity provider. If you have ADFS hosted from somebody else or some kind of single sign-on, that would be an IDP or an identity provider. We're actually going to see one of them later on in here. SAML, WS Federation, WS Trust, and ADAL are all kind of different standards for authenticating to ADFS. We're not going to dive too deep into each of these. Just know that they're kind of involved with ADFS. And the ADAL is Azure AD Authentication Library. We're going to talk about it when we get to the Graph API stuff, which is actually pretty cool stuff, but that's further on here. So federation can mean a lot of different things. You know, we're looking at Active Directory Federation services. You start looking for Windows Federation information, you get a lot of different information. You can think of it from a couple of different ways, federating from domain to domain. So I work for NetSpy. If NetSpy wants to talk to DerbyCon.com, we can set up some kind of federation to communicate or share things across that federation. You can also do the same thing from a domain to Microsoft. I have a wonderful Microsoft Paint diagram of how some organizations are shipping accounts up to Microsoft to manage things like Azure or doing things like Office 365. So you can think of federation in a couple of different ways there, or just arbitrary meanings based off of forum posts. Like I said, if you Google for Windows Federation stuff, unless you're really specifically looking for something like ADFS Federation information or Skype for Business Federation, you're going to go down a bunch of different rabbit holes. So I've spent a fair amount of time digging into a lot of this stuff. Hopefully it's all clear and makes sense here. So some frequently federated services. Now these are services that would allow for federated authentication either through ADFS or they have some kind of federation that you could set up. So things like Skype for Business. Businesses can communicate to each other. If DerbyCon had their own Skype for Business set up internally and we at NetSpy wanted to chat over Skype for Business with them, we could set up federation with them. Things like Exchange, you can federate calendars between organizations. I don't really see much of the Exchange federation out there. Azure Active Directory, we're going to dive into a little bit later. SharePoint, apps in general, probably talk about it later, but in terms of federating apps, you can set up federation to do authentication for web apps or thick apps, things like that. So going into the actual attack walkthroughs, this is how we're kind of going to go through this whole process. We're going to identify the actual federated endpoints. Let's say you've got a domain, you want to see if it's got federation or ADFS set up somewhere. We'll show you how to set up a test environment, which is partly focused on the Skype phishing stuff, but there are some benefits to having a domain with federation stuff set up. We're going to show you one slide about user enumeration, do recon and figure out where you can find users. And then validating those users, social engineering recon, and kind of moving into more of the actual escalating, trying to get into the internal network, kind of finishing with pivoting to the internal network. So, starting things off, identifying federated endpoints is kind of an interesting thing. We can actually ask Microsoft. So in Office 365, they had an authentication bypass issue, and the person who wrote up the whole thing is actually, well, you'll see here in a second. They actually wrote up this whole method in that auth bypass blog post, and it was like a week before I was going to put a blog out about this. But it was a really cool SAML assertions bug where they basically could get access to any federated Office 365 domain. I've got the link down here at the bottom. If you get a chance to actually read it, it's Economy of Mechanism. I think it's The Road to Hell is Paved with SAML Assertions. I think that's the title of it. Either way, it's really, really interesting. The work that they were doing with SAML, a little bit deeper than we're going to go into today, but it was really interesting stuff. So anyways, I put together all of this stuff around about the same time they were working on the same thing. So credit to them for posting on it first, but we'll talk about it here. So when I said you can just go out to Microsoft to ask for federation info, it's pretty simple. If you go out to login.microsoftonline.com or portal.azure.com or portal.office.com, any of those, you're going to be prompted by a login prompt to log into whatever service you're going to. So here we see Office 365. If you put an email address into the email or phone, I guess I can't really highlight anything over here, but into that box there, it sends out this request. So you can see here that I sent out the request for Karl@example.com, and it just makes a simple GET request. And Microsoft's going to have one of two responses. So if it's a federated domain, you're going to get the federation info. It's going to say, hey, it's federated. I've got it highlighted in red. It's going to give you an auth URL, which is the ADFS endpoint that you're going to authenticate to create that token to access Office 365. So really with the Federated, you hit Office 365 and say, oh, actually, we want you to go talk to this ADFS server somewhere else. If it's a managed domain, as in Azure Active Directory accounts hosted in Microsoft, or potentially if somebody's shipping their accounts up to Microsoft for this managed domain, you can just authenticate directly against Microsoft at that point. And we'll talk about ways that you can brute force creds against that later. So just kind of a picture diagram for people that are more visual. Here's what the managed federation looks like. You're looking at a DC sync between the Microsoft Azure Active Directory and the Acme company. So yeah, thank you, Microsoft Paint. So anyways, as an Office 365 user goes to authenticate to Microsoft for Office 365, they go out to the Azure AD, authenticate against that, we're good. If it's federated, Microsoft says, hey, actually, I want you to get the token from the ADFS server at the Acme company who's talking to their DC internally. Then you get the token, send it off to Microsoft. Pretty simple. Took 2 minutes to draw that up in Paint. So, yeah. So I like things to go quickly and have automation, so I just wrap this in PowerShell. It's a simple GET request, and you parse the JSON response. It's maybe, 20 lines of code. But I also like tables. Data tables are really easier to work with. So here we can see the result for a federated domain. Not to pick on Fox News or PayPal, but they're in like the top 10 of the Alexa top 1 million, so they were easy to pull out of the first few results. So I actually do have a link for the PowerShell script as well as the blog about this, but basically you give it an email. You could just give it a domain. I'm probably going to change that because it's simpler. But it goes and does the submission for you, parses all that JSON and puts it out to a table. So in this case, we can see at Fox News, they're using Okta as their IDP. We can see brand name, federation kind of info. PayPal, we can see it's managed. We can also do multiple domains at once. I just did a get content on a list of other domains, and just for sake of privacy, I guess, on their part, I mean, anybody can do this with the Alexa Top Million and get the same thing, but I did a handful just to kind of show the variances between managed, federated, or NA, if technically that's the third response you'd get if they're not managed or federated. If they don't have any kind of connection to Microsoft, you'd get NA. So anyways, let's see here. So an alternative method to doing this, and I haven't quite found a benefit of this over the method I just showed, but it's kind of some neat information gathering that you can do. When you go to claim a domain within the Microsoft portal, you have to prove that you own that domain. So here I tried to prove that I owned office.com, and they prompted me to put something in my TXT record in my DNS. So it wants this ms equals ms49 whatever value. And it wants me to put that into my TXT record so they can validate that I actually own that. Makes sense. It's a good thing. Well, we can go ahead and query for that. So in Fox News' case, they've got the ms equals ms402, blah, blah, blah. So it's a good indication that they're federating with Microsoft, or at some point they were. Chances are if they decided to move away from Office 365 or something like that, maybe they forgot it in their text record, who knows. Additionally, you could just go to the portal website login. I guess I probably should have talked about that. Instead of using the script, or instead of parsing everything, you could just go to the login and get redirected, but that's kind of a sidetrack. Anyways, so looking through the top 1 million text records for the Alexa sites, found that 47,455 had the ms equals ms star record. So that's kind of the footprint we're dealing with here out of the top 1 million. It may not be the best sample set to look for this kind of info, but it seems like there's pretty good adoption for federating with Microsoft or having some kind of connection out there. DNS is kind of a pain doing a 1 million record lookup. It's better than sending 1 million web requests out to Microsoft. So yes, you're welcome, Microsoft. I didn't want to get in trouble with them for sending a whole bunch of requests to see who's federated and who's not. Other options, if you're going against domain.com, chances are their IDP is probably adfs.domain.com or sts.domain.com. Most of the implementations we've seen, that's what's coming back. So setting up your test environment. We're going to be focusing a little bit on the Skype for Business stuff at this point. I think it's kind of cool, but here's kind of an overview. I didn't realize that was an animated GIF when I initially put it in here, but it kind of works out. So first things first, you probably want to have a domain ready to do some of this stuff with. In my case, I was able to pick up microsoftsupport.online for 88 cents. Pretty handy. There's a couple other options that you might want to use. In our examples here, we're going to be dealing with microsoftsupport.online. Seems pretty legit, especially as we're talking to people over Skype. So getting Office 365 hosted services, I'm currently just doing the Skype for Business online plan, which gets me a federated Skype for Business setup for $5 a month. It's pretty reasonable, and if you're doing some kind of assessment where you want to be able to fire this up quickly, the Microsoft Cloud services are actually really good for this. So once you've purchased the service, you go ahead and add that MS record to your text record, claim the domain, get it set up. And what we want to do is set up a user and enable federation for that domain at this point. For all of our demos going forward, we're going to be dealing with support at microsoftsupport.online. Seems pretty legitimate. Display name is going to be Skype support, and we want to turn on this little checkbox over here for allowing other people in other organizations to contact people in our organizations. That enables the federation between the different domains. It's actually really kind of crucial in the next few steps here. So a little bit further on the Skype for Business stuff, getting the link, which Skype for Business is the new Link. Link just had a rebrand to Skype for Business. The underlying technology is pretty much the same stuff, but it just has a different name now. The easiest way I've found to get that SDK installed is to actually have Visual Studio 2010 installed. It's kind of a pain, and the SDK is kind of out of date, but if you've got Visual Studio 2010, that's about the easiest way to get that set up. I think we have some people joining us here. All right, so once you've got all that set up, go ahead and log in for your Skype for Business user. Again, we're using Skype support. I've got a pretty legitimate looking icon here. Seems like it's pretty trustworthy. Additionally, I've got the PowerShell modules out here. This is on the NetSpy GitHub. It should be under the PowerShell folder out on NetSpy's GitHub. So it's both the Get ADFS Endpoint and the PowerSkype. And finally, the last thing and kind of final step of getting all of our test environment set up, and I promise we'll get into the more interesting stuff right after that, is installing the Azure AD PowerShell module. We're going to do a little bit of PowerShell stuff that wraps some of the functionality of this AD PowerShell module to go and query Azure Active Directory. So that's a pretty handy thing to have. So user enumeration. I think most people in the room have pretty good targets that they go after to enumerate first name, last name, email address, that kind of stuff. There's a million different frameworks out there. Just choose the one that you like to use. Personally, I like enumerating users off of a LinkedIn page for a company. It's pretty handy. Just use one of the many recon frameworks. Nick's Geek is here. I did some really cool user enumeration work for Link/Skype for Business. So take a look at his recording from yesterday. Some pretty cool stuff there. So once we've got some users that we want to go after, well, how do we validate those? How do we know that they're real? Well, we can use federated Skype for Business instances to validate these emails. You'll see it in just a second here. But once we've got that full list, we want to be able to check if they're legitimate emails. So in this case, my email is not carl.fosaaen1@netspy.com. So when we put that into the Skype for Business client, try to open up a message with that email address, we get this presence unknown. Doesn't seem like anything's there. Well, if I put in my correct email address, it actually shows my job title. It shows if I'm available or if I'm away or out of office. And it also shows that I'm video capable. So I've got a webcam. So this is really good info. We actually kind of stumbled on this. One of our project managers brought us over as we were trying to set up a project with one of our clients, and she's like, should I be able to Skype message this client? Like, no, that doesn't seem right. And sure enough, we figured out that we had Federation set up, they had Federation set up, and we could instant message between them. So that's kind of where a lot of this stuff started research-wise for me. I got kind of interested in that Federation, which ended up leading to more of the ADFS stuff. So the Federation stuff is really cool. We could just start talking to CEOs. Here's 4 different CEOs that I can pull up and verify on Skype for Business. And there's some very interesting potential impact here. Let's say you're an angry customer and you happen to hear this talk. You can go ahead and set up your own federated Skype for Business and go ahead and tell the CEO how you feel. Additional functionality, I mean, you can do Skype for Business phone calls on here, or video chats, or send them whenever you want. We'll get a little more into that in a little bit, but having CEOs exposed is kind of a little scary. So, and I have it in a note here. If you talk to salespeople about this, they get really excited. They go, oh, I can know when the director of IT is seated at their desk. Oh, I can see if they're available or not. I can give them a phone call and talk to them about sales. It's always kind of fun to talk to those people. So, so again, since I like automation, I like to be able to do this stuff quickly. We're just going to wrap this in PowerShell. This is where it's handy to have the Skype/Link SDK installed. We're actually going to be using that SDK to make all of these queries and get everything kind of set up. So again, if you've got the PowerShell module from GitHub, it's git-Skype status. In this case, in the demo that we're going to do, we're just going to feed it an input of test emails. Here's a screenshot of what it's going to look like. So we get job titles. These are a bunch of emails that are purposefully redacted. I get full name, what their status is, all of that good stuff. So we'll do a quick demo here. So what I did, and I'm going to talk about it here in a second in terms of statistics and exposure, but I went and tried to look up, what domains were federated for Skype for Business. It's kind of hard to find some of that information, some of the info that's already out there. There's technically a database of it that's a website that was a good starting point, but I went through and tried to enumerate all of the administrator accounts with those to see who was active and online. So we've got this live admins.txt that we're going to use. And it also helps if we run this a couple of times. Sometimes the federation is a little bit slow to catch up. We'll see if it is slow in the demo or not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. We're actually going to skip that. You guys can see over there, but yeah, that is something else, but give me 2 seconds here. All right. Everybody see that? Because I can't. So I'm going to try and project so the mic picks it up. What we see here is I'm logged in as Skype support in Skype for Business. We've got PowerShell in the background here with the, oh, this is really tricky. With the PowerSkype module loaded up, and we're going to use that test emails. I'm actually going to hop down here. So we're actually going to use that test emails file here, and I know the font size is really tiny here, but we're going to pick that up to format table auto size, and hopefully get a list of statuses. All right, so this is going to take a second to run, but really the core functionality that's happening in the back end is we start a conversation with somebody's email address. We never actually send them anything. So in the Skype or Link SDK, you can start a conversation, but you don't actually have to send anything. So we start up the conversation, get the current status of the user, and then just close out the conversation. So they never see anything on their end. We just get their status information, and we output that to a table. Right there. Cool. So this might be a little difficult to see, but I'm going to try this. I apologize. I really like the presenter mode so I can still see my notes. Otherwise, I'd be mirroring everything, and I don't want to switch between the two. Sounds like we have a question. So the question was, where did I get the domain name? So what I actually did is I went through the Alexa top 1 million and tried to see which ones had federated Skype, and kind of worked down from there. So these are all the default administrator domain admin accounts. I'm not trying to target any of these people specifically, but we get all of this information back in the table there. All right. So let's return to this. All right, cool. So, yeah, that's really handy info to have, right? Being able to look up status, validate the actual email addresses so we know that they're real, so we can use them for authentication. So of the top million, we had that 47,000 with the MS equals MS star. I didn't do very broad sweeping checks outside of the administrator account, but 45 of the domains had administrator available. And there may be a few more than that. People may be changing their default domain admin's username, something like that, or they may just not have an actual federated Skype for Business account for it. But Skype doesn't really like opening a ton of Skype conversations, so once you hit around 2,000 conversations, the client itself starts crashing. So if anybody wants to dive deeper into that for a bug bounty, let me know. I can get you the info on that. But anyways, as I'm trying to go through these top million, I keep crashing the client and having to restart. So there may be more than 45. I don't know. But I got some good information from Nixky. Again, you should go back and watch that talk. But there were 38,658 linkdiscover.domain.com. So linkdiscover is what you would use to kind of identify that link or Skype server out on the internet. You can use it for things like conferences, things like that. But that's some pretty good surface area there, so we might have missed a little bit. Of those, it's kind of hard to tell how many are federated. So that's kind of our surface attack that we're looking at there. So what we're going to move forward into next is Skype message phishing. It's kind of a little bit further than just getting status. So we've got a fairly legitimate looking Skype for Business account that we're using. It looks like Skype support with Microsoft. If we send them something saying, hey, what's your password? We need to fix Skype on your machine, or some better pretext than that, we can queue all of this up with PowerShell and send it out to an entire domain. So if we validate, entire LinkedIn's list of email addresses, we can just go ahead and spam that out to everybody over Skype for Business. So let's see here. The second command that we're showing here specifically is selecting people that are available. You probably don't want to try and send a Skype for Business message out to somebody that's busy or out of office, something like that. So we'll do a demo here. In this case, we're going to send a message to me. And we're also going to send 10 messages to me. If you really want to annoy somebody, you could send them 1,000 messages. You'll see here, hopefully if everything gets squared away properly. Okay. Oh, that is going to be difficult. So I'm going to have to do a little back and forth here because I'm not mirroring screens here. Where's my mouse? Oh, there we are. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to check my status. You can guess my email address pretty easily. I'm not too worried. So we see that I'm available and online, I believe. I'm busy, but I'm around. So what we want to do, I apologize that this demo's struggling a little bit, is we're going to send a message to me saying, hello from DerbyCon. All right, did something, all right, I'm going to accept that. And hello from DerbyCon. Fun stuff. And from the perspective of the user, we don't have an icon or any real information here, but it says Skype support. And that looks pretty legitimate, somewhat believable. You know, for a phishing pretext, we're probably not going to say hello from DerbyCon. Let's see here. And then the last command we're going to do here is to send 10 messages. All right, everybody see that? So we're going to do a for loop here to send the Skype message to my email with the hello $, whatever my iterator is. So we'll see it loading up here, and you can't see it on my end, but Skype for Business keeps flashing down over here. Like I said, if you do like 100 or 1,000, it will keep going for a long time. When I did the practice run of this back at the Nets by Office, I think I did 100, and it was still flashing on my screen like 20 minutes later. So it may take a while. All right. Perfect. So that was kind of fun. We've got a video demo of it too, which we can skip because we just did this. Another fun thing is actually sending UNC paths. Who's familiar with UNC paths? Good number of hands. Awesome. So if you're already on the internal domain, let's say I'm doing an on-site pen test somewhere, I've got domain creds, I can log into their Skype instance directly from my box. I can just load up a PowerShell here and list an entire list of email addresses for the internal domain and send them that UNC path. There's a fair number of people that are probably going to click on it because I already have domain creds, and this is coming from an internal domain user. Shuttling UNC paths and SMB connections out over the internet, probably not going to get as much mileage over that. I haven't had a whole lot testing that, or a whole lot of luck testing that in my environment, but internally this should work just fine. So I guess on your end, from an attack structure, you would have an SMB listener waiting so that when they clicked on that link, go ahead and authenticate to you, you have credentials. You can either relay those or try and crack them, et cetera, et cetera. Additionally, if you're external, you know, HTTP links work as well, so trying to phish somebody that way is pretty handy. Yeah, I think we covered everything there. Well, really, the only demo here I can show you, just for sake of demo, is just sending that UNC path so you can see what it looks like. Come back over here. That pop up over there? There we go. So you can see the UNC path shows up just fine. All right. So there's a little bit more further work to do with this. I've got some more stuff that I want to add, like specifically sending files. I mean, it's nice to send messages, but I'd much rather send files. This link SDK is a little difficult to deal with at times, so getting the file set up is a little bit tricky. But you can also pull down SIP endpoints. I don't have any of that in this demo here, but if you want to pull down a domain's worth of phone numbers, including cell phone numbers, which are frequently stored in Active Directory, you can pull that down too. Additionally, brute forcing Skype creds using the link SDK, it's kind of a pain. Trying to get the authentication process set up with that link SDK can be a little bit tedious. So Nixgeek had some great methods in terms of using the NTLM auth for the link auto-discover. That's stuff that I'm going to add into PowerSkype within the next couple of weeks here. So, dictionary attacks against federated accounts. So we've got a domain that's federated. We know it. Microsoft told us so. How do we start brute forcing creds, right? We're on the external side. We don't have a whole lot of options other than maybe phishing Skype credentials or anything like that. We want to try and brute force creds. Well, it's probably not totally clear in the screenshot here, but that get ADFS endpoint PowerShell commandlet that I have here, if you do the -cmd flag, you actually get a command that comes back with this invoke ADFS security token request for federated domains. You can get that directly from Microsoft. It was from one of their blog posts here. And it should give you all of the information that you need to create that request. In this case, we're going against adfs.example.com. We're going to use karl.fosaaen as the username. Password is winter 2016. I guess I changed it a little early from summer 2016. And you have to have the domain too. So in terms of enumerating the domain, Skype for Business or Link, if it has a NTLM HTTP interface on the auto-discover, you can go ahead and try to pull the domain information from that. Just hit it with nmap, pull back what the domain info is there. The really tricky part here is you have to have the correct username. I don't know how many of you have been in environments where they rename the Active Directory accounts from Fosaaen to A123456. If I wanted to authenticate as somebody that was like that, I would have to have that A123456. So if you're renaming things different from what the email address is, so like if the email address is karl.fosaaen and the username is karl.fosaaen, that's pretty easy. But if they're renaming it to something else, you have to have that correct username in there. So small caveat there. We pick our SAML version, all of that. Since this was direct from Microsoft, for my own personal use, I've just wrapped it with a try-catch. The little red text here that you see, authentication successful. Per their software licensing model, I can't repackage any of this, so I may end up just rewriting it in a different way. We'll see. But for right now, I've just been wrapping it with a try-catch block, and if I'm able to successfully authenticate, it writes out. So that blog post is pretty handy to kind of figure out how this authentication process works. So if it's a Microsoft managed domain, we've just been looking at federated domains, we can actually just directly authenticate to Microsoft. Now they probably don't appreciate a ton of failed authentication requests. I'm guessing, I don't know. I haven't heard anything directly from them, but I'm just guessing. So we can wrap this connect MSOL service with kind of a try-catch thing to see if we can actually authenticate to the Microsoft Online Services. Now this is coming directly from the Azure Active Directory PowerShell modules that I talked about earlier. So in this case, the command here is just get credential for a cred. We pass that credential into connect MSOL service. If you really want to put clear text creds in your script, you can do that, whatever. Basically, you can wrap this connect MSOL service to try and brute force creds. The tricky thing is killing that connection after you've successfully guessed a credential. So if I'm halfway through the users list and I guess a summer 2016 password, that keeps that MSOL service connection open, and there's no easy way to kill that other than killing PowerShell. So one of my coworkers at NetSpy, Ryan Gandrew, is kind of working on some workarounds for that to try and brute force those Microsoft Online creds. Sorry, Microsoft. So, once we've got those credentials, a couple of users with weak passwords is nice, but we want to have a full list of the domain users, because at this point we're still on the external network. We want to be able to start pivoting internally. So we can use some other ADFS services to enumerate the rest of the domain users. So it's pretty easy if you're on Azure Active Directory. Once we have that MSOL connection, we could just do get MSOL user -all, and that should list out everybody that's been shipped out to the Microsoft Azure Active Directory. So this is pretty handy. You get all of the great information here. We can see here support at microsoftsupport.online. It's pretty simple. It's easy to get a list of users. This also works for apps that are using Azure Active Directory. So if there's any application testers in the room, or primarily application testers, this would be a good takeaway for you. If the application, either a web app or a thick client app, is using Azure Active Directory for its authentication, make sure that you're using your creds for the app to connect to this MSOL user, or the MSOL service online, because you can just list out all of the other users in the application typically. I've done a couple of web apps now that use Azure Active Directory for their authentication. I just use the credentials that the client has given me to connect to the MSOL service and list out all of the other users for that application, which can be really handy. I mean, if you get a web app and you're able to guess, the administrator's password, that's a nice little bypass there. So this one's this one's kind of a work in progress. I discovered the Graph API probably 2 weeks ago, just as I was kind of wrapping up these slides here. The Graph API is a web service that you can use that Microsoft hosts, or that you can kind of work through to get domain information. We can do a quick demo of it here. The code for this is really beta at the moment. But basically, you create a graph token. And when you do that, you can see it here. It pops up this little sign into your account. If it's a managed domain, it will go and authenticate to Microsoft. And if it's a federated domain, it will just forward you on to that ADFS server for that domain. So this is really handy. We've had a couple of domains that I've done this for where they have pretty limited federated services or ADFS services on the internet, but they still allow access to their ADFS server through the Graph API. We just create the token, list the tenant, the domain goes here part, it's the Azure AD tenant. We're basically pulling down a list of users here. You can pull this from the PowerShell GitHub from NetSpy here. I'll pull up the demo here. We do have a video demo of this. I'm going to play the video instead, assuming it's playing here, because this one has a tendency to crash on my box right now. So we're going to sign in as support at Microsoft support.online. I just pasted the password in there. And we can see here that we listed out the domain users right here. So this is kind of handy. So this is kind of the last of the items here. If everything's really limited and you're just really trying to find 10, okay. Find kind of the last of the users. You can connect to Exchange Online, assuming that's set up. This is actually coming really handy for one of our assessments. I'm going to leave this stuff in here. The slides will be posted on SlideShare probably later today, so you can get that info from here. It's not, I don't know, it's somewhat interesting, but we've already kind of covered a couple other methods already. So we'll bounce past this here real quick. Really, it's just using the Exchange PowerShell Live ID stuff on Office 365 to go ahead and get a list of all the mailboxes. So here's the fun part, pivoting to the internal network. This is probably what you're all waiting for. Okay, yeah, we guess default creds against these ADFS interfaces. How do we get to the internal network? As an external pen tester, that's really what we want to do. So believe it or not, I've found single-factor VPN on 3 different client networks from external pen tests already this year. I do a decent number of external pen tests, but it's not like every day. It's, you know, I do web apps, I do internal. I'm not constantly doing external. 3 already this year is kind of concerning, kind of surprising. So with one of these clients, we enumerated some emails on LinkedIn, went ahead and guessed against MS Online with PowerShell those passwords. We got a full list of all of their users, got default creds, enumerated their VPN interfaces as part of the external pen test, logged in with single-factor VPN. Cool, we're in, this is great. They had group policy with shared local admin on all their boxes, found a DA, went ahead and did the DC sync. I don't know how many internal pen testers in here have gotten to run into this yet, but the store passwords using reversible encryption, this is fantastic. So when you do a DC sync against a domain controller that has this flag set up, the client didn't actually know that they had this flag set, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to get most of the passwords back in clear text. Eric Gruber was helping out on this one. He's sitting down here. And he couldn't believe it. Like, he did the DC sync. He's like, well, I was going to get you some hashes to crack, but here's all of the internal passwords. It's just all clear text. So that was kind of handy. So there's other routes. You know, you're not going to run into single-factor VPN everywhere you go. I've just gotten lucky and found a handful of clients so far this year. You know, there's other single-factor services that are out there, and that's kind of what we're highlighting on with the multiple different areas that we can try to authenticate against. There's multiple different services, and you know, you may have dual-factor set up directly on the ADFS server, but it may not be for the you know, the Exchange interface or you know, the Azure Active Directory, anything like that. So we still surprisingly see a fair amount of RDP, SSH with Active Directory cred, SharePoint, terminal services, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of single-factor routes available. So one of the ways to pivot outside of just using one of those services or VPN is malicious OneDrive documents. So you're coming from the internet, if they've got Office 365 set up with some kind of federation, you can just drop a malicious macroed Word document into their OneDrive. Now this kind of assumes that they're using OneDrive. A lot of people that we know that have Office 365, they don't actually realize they have OneDrive. It's kind of, oh, I can put stuff out in the cloud, and then people figure out that, yeah, you shouldn't be putting that stuff out in the cloud anyways, so your mileage may vary with that as well. But I was kind of surprised. I kind of assumed that the macros would have gotten stripped out. When you put them up in OneDrive, they do persist. If you open up the document in Word on the web portal, like the Word, or the web version of Word, your macros aren't really going to help you out there. Malicious SharePoint. I missed the SharePoint talk, and I'm kind of bummed out that I wasn't able to make it. But there's plenty of attacks you can do against SharePoint. We do frequently see that exposed to the internet. So potentially just editing, content on the actual SharePoint page or backdooring shared documents. That's kind of an attack vector that I really like is, if you're able to access somebody's SharePoint where they're sharing documents over that, you know that, domain admin or privileged account is opening up that document, you can go ahead and backdoor that document. Sending messages directly from Outlook Web Access or Exchange Online or Skype for Business. Once you've got domain creds, you can pretend to be somebody from the domain. So say, hey, can you go look at this Word doc for me? Seems somewhat trustworthy. This is especially good on the internal side of things. So I think Nick left because I think he had to get a flight, but I was able to talk to him about his malicious Outlook rule stuff. Nick Landers from Silent Break Security came up with this way of executing programs with malicious rules. You should definitely, I have it, I retweeted it on Twitter. I got 5 left, all right. Go and check out his talk from yesterday. Really good stuff. And a little further work to kind of programmatically do this, the MAPI interface over HTTP. SensePost had a really cool post about this. Check that out as well. Basically, you're creating a malicious rule to run a program and get a shell on somebody's box. I tried to do this programmatically with PowerShell. I was talking to Nick about this earlier. Using the PowerShell commandlets for Outlook, you can't really do this. You can't do the run a program rule. For some reason, they don't allow that for rule creation from those commandlets, so kind of annoying. So I was happy to see this MAPI over HTTP thing, because that helps get past that. So in terms of attack mitigations, set up dual factor on as many authentication endpoints as you can. Here's one that was from the Alexa Top 1 Million, just went to the Office 365 login, got redirected to their ADFS server, and they've got RSA Secure ID passcode right there. That's great. That's going to stop me for that interface. They may have 5 other interfaces. They're all single factor, and we can try and brute force creds and find other ways in. But enabling dual factor as much as you can, that's great. Limiting federation to trusted domains only. This is particularly important for the Skype for Business. If you only need to Skype chat with one other company, only open up federation to that one other company. There are ways that you can limit it. It's good. Personally, I don't really see much of a benefit to widely federating Skype for Business. I like talking to my clients. It's not a problem there. But it does kind of open up this large surface area of people being able to chat with each other, that kind of thing. Let's see here. Monitoring any federated or Azure endpoints. The Azure Active Directory cloud stuff is great for monitoring. They have a ton of monitoring tools that you can use. I actually took a look at some of the cloud monitoring stuff for my own accounts as I was doing some of this testing. Really good information and feedback in there. And I know everybody says this, you can't get rid of weak passwords, but setting stronger password requirements is at least going to make me do, summer 2016 ! Or something. I mean, you'd be surprised at how frequently you see this. And I don't mean to call out anybody in the room that may have summer 2016 as their password. You should really change that right now if that's your password. That's one of the first things that we're going to guess when we're guessing passwords. So that's about all I have. I just wanted to do a quick special thanks. My coworkers at NetSpy who put up with the constant barrage of Skype messages. Sorry, guys. But I was I've bounced a ton of ideas off of our internal team here. Everybody's given really good suggestions, so thanks to my coworkers, management team for giving me time to work on this, and Jared, I'm sure you might see this eventually. My friend Jared actually suggested I look into Federation like 5 years ago, and he kind of started me down this path, so thanks to Jared for that. So I guess if anybody has any questions, I'll stick around here. I'm at Fosaaen on Twitter. There's links to the blog, GitHub, and SlideShare. Any questions?